one last thing. Let me see. Let's see here. Okay, I think I got enough juice in my phone.
Okay.
All right, let me just plug this in just in case. Let's see. Now, I should be good. I'll check it. Okay, whenever you're ready.
All right. All right, this is a special edition of the Full Court Press with Coach Jay. I have with me today legendary coach Mike Jarvis. Most of you know him from St. John's. He's also been at Fort Atlantic and some other places. I'll let him tell you about that. Coach, I'm going to start you out with a funny question, and then after I finish that question, go ahead and just tell us about yourself, those that don't know and those that do know, and then your coaching journey, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
When you got into the coaching business, I think everybody has that rude awakening and they get that one whipping as a coach. Can you talk about that one whooping that you got as a coach to make you realize that it was a real, like, this is real, I got to really work to be a good coach?
Well, it's funny. Fortunately, I don't think I ever had the problem of realizing how difficult coaching was, because I started out as a teacher, and that's what a coach is. A coach is a teacher.
Yes,
I'm trying to think of probably one whipping, one time we lost that probably I remember as well as any. And it was about halfway maybe through my coaching career. I'd gone to George Washington, and I had a new group of guys, great guys. They worked hard, and I thought we were really ready to start the season. My mom came down, from Massachusetts. My sister, my whole family was there. And the guys tricked me. They didn't play the way they had practiced. They didn't play the kind of defense that, they had been taught. They didn't share the ball the way that they had in practice. And I remember after the game, my mom says to me, Mike, are you sure you made the right choice in coming here? Of course, she really wanted me to stay home in Boston, the Boston area. But anyhow, I'll never forget that game. It was against a team that we should have beaten, Loyola of Maryland. And so we went back the next day, and we went back to work, and I told the guys they were never going to trick me again. And the next couple of days later, we played St. Joe's, and we won our first game, and our first league game also. And we had a really good season. We went to NIT, did something that they hadn't done before.
Okay. Go ahead and just introduce yourself. I think most people who are going to watch this know who you are, but just give them a little bit about yourself, and then tell us about your coaching journey and what was important about it, and the stops, and however you want to talk about that.
All right. Well, first of all, if I sound a little bit funny, it's because I was born and raised in Massachusetts. That's number one. But all my life, I wanted to be in sports, wanted to coach, wanted to actually coach at my high school. So my journey was a little bit different. When I graduated from Northeastern University, I did get the teaching job at my high school, which was Ridge Technical High School in Cambridge, but I couldn't get the basketball job. So fortunately for me, my head coach at Northeastern, Dick Dukeshire, hired me as an assistant. So I worked during the day teaching and coached at night at Northeastern. And I did that for 5 years. Then I got an opportunity to coach with a legend, Satch Sanders, former Boston Celtic, who had played on like 9 world championship teams. And I coached 4 years with Satch at Harvard. Well, at the end of my 4th year, I thought I was going to be the head coach at Harvard, but they chose somebody else. So I was out of coaching. And I started a youth basketball program called Shoot Straight. And in that program, there was a young kid, couple kids. One was a real youngster by the name of Ramil Robinson, who went on to win a national championship at Michigan, who later played for me in high school. But during that time, during those Harvard years, I met and started to work with and teach a young guy from Jamaica by the name of Patrick Ewing how to play basketball. So what I didn't realize was God was preparing me not only to coach, be the head coach at the school, but also to handle the recruitment of the number 1 player in the country. So anyhow, 10 years after Northeastern, 10 years later, I finally got the job I wanted, which was the head basketball job at the high school. So during that time, when you got a guy like Patrick Ewing and a lot of other really good players around him, you don't lose many games. We lost one game. We were 77-1. We won 3 consecutive Division I state championships. And then he went on to Georgetown and on to bigger and better things. And the young man that I had in my youth basketball program during that year that I was in exile, Ramil Robinson, was at the high school now. And we continued to win championships and win a lot of games. So I got a lot of attention from Patrick mainly, and also from the Ramil Robinson teams. And I was recruited and hired at Boston University. So I coached at Boston University for 5 years. We had great success, great young men who worked awfully hard. Then I went from there to George Washington University. We had incredible success there for 8 years. And then the big lights of New York shined upon me, and I couldn't resist. And my wife and I, we left for New York, and we coached at St. John's for 5 years. We won a lot of games, won some championships, cut down some nets, had some great players like Ron Artest and Eric Barkley and Bootsy Thornton and, Anthony Glover. I mean, we just, 1 year, in fact, we lost, unfortunately, by 3 points to Ohio State with a chance to go to the Final Four. And the next year, we probably had as good a team, if not a better team, and we lost out west to Gonzaga. Because in those days, when we were a number 2 seed, and the NCAA sent us out west because I don't think they wanted us to win anyhow. So we went west, and they got us, and we lost by a couple of points to Gonzaga. And but we had some great years, and then things went sour in New York between my agent and the president, and the two egos could not coexist, and I was caught in the middle, and we agreed to basically disassociate. So my wife and I moved to Florida, and after I forget how many years, maybe 3 years, 4 years in living in Florida, the Florida Atlantic job opened up in Boca Raton, and I had the itch to get back into coaching. My wife gave me the blessing, so I returned to coaching at Florida Atlantic and coached there for 6-7 years, and coached my last game in the Conference USA tournament in Texas, El Paso in March of 2014. So I had a incredible life as a coach, as a teacher, as a parent, and one of the greatest trophies I ever received was in 1993 when my son Michael joined me as my assistant at George Washington, and we were the first African-American father-son coaching team in the history of Division I basketball. We coached the longest father-son team I think ever. We coached together for basically 20 years, other than a few years when I was out of coaching. But it's been an incredible life, and I wouldn't change any of it for anything. And I'm exactly right now where God wants me to be here in Florida, and doing the work that He wants me to do.
All right, Coach. Well, that is excellent story. I remember those years when you had Ron Artest and Eric Barkley and those guys. And one of my friends that commented on the post yesterday, we were like, we want to go to St. John's, play for Coach Jarvis, because that's just what we wanted to do. So who was your biggest influence in coaching, and who were your mentors throughout your coaching career?
Well, it's funny. The guy that got me into basketball, into sports, was my brother Richard. He took me to my first Celtics basketball game when the Celtics won the world championship every year. In fact, during my youth, I saw them win 11 world championships. Bill Russell won 9 out of 10. The only year they didn't win was when he sprained his ankle in, I think it was 58 or whatever, against the St. Louis Hawks. But my hero growing up, who later became one of my mentors, was Red Auerbach. And I learned a lot by watching him and studying him, and then eventually getting to know him. But along the way, I had some great coaches. My college coach was one of the best teachers of basketball that New England ever saw. In fact, he went to Greece to start professional basketball in Greece, Dick Dukeshire. Sat Sanders, great mentor, great teacher. And I've had so many great teachers and mentors along the way. I mean, I learned defense by studying Bobby Knight. I basically tried to pick up little things from all the different people that I met along the way, and then incorporate them into a system that fit me. And like I said, it's been quite a journey. And I mean, I've had so many people. I mean, my mom was my first coach ever, and she taught me that you could correct somebody and love them at the same time. And I learned so many lessons about leadership from her. In fact, when I wrote my last book, The 7 C's of Leadership, I started out by talking about, what she meant and how I got those 7 principles from her.
Okay. I want to talk about some of your days at St. John's when you were playing at Cameron Indoor.
Yeah.
What was that atmosphere like? And go into Cameron Indoor to be able to win and have success, and just be able to have success against a great coach like Coach K. Talk about that just a little bit.
Well, first of all, when you respect someone as much as I respect Coach K, we are very good friends. In fact, my wife and I went to his daughter's wedding, and we've shared a lot of we used to be on the board of directors of the NABC together. And in fact, at one time, it was the Mike and Mike show. And I love Coach Krzyzewski, and I love what he's done and what he does. So to go into Cameron Indoor to play in what I think is the greatest college atmosphere there is in basketball, and the toughest. But to go into Cameron and to have a team that's good enough and tough enough, like my St. John's team, with a 6'4.5" center in center by the name of Anthony Glover, surrounded by Barkley and Thornton and Lavelle Postel and I said Glover already probably, and Chudney Gray. I mean, we just had Reggie Jesse. I mean, we had a great team, and we went in there. In fact, it was during the 1999, I think, 2000 season. They hadn't lost. In fact, this year was last season was the first time they lost a home game in like 20 years. We were the last team to beat them there, and we won. I think the score was like 87, 84, something like that. Bootsy Thornton had another, incredible game, as did the other guys. And we won. And the night, it was a 12 o'clock game. So all day long, we could watch the highlights on ESPN. It was one of the best days of coaching I ever had. But to go in there and to beat them, in a close games that they never ever lose, I mean, it was extraordinary. And in fact, that year, that week, we had one of the best weeks I think that any college team ever had. We beat Duke, Connecticut, and Syracuse in 1 week. Sports Illustrated called it Hell Week. And I don't know if any team has ever had a week like that in college basketball. We didn't lose a game during the month of February, to be honest with you. And if it weren't for, just a couple of bounces, we'd have been in the Final Four. But it was quite a game.
With that, you say you played, that was one of the best college atmospheres ever. Talk about the whole coaching experience in Madison Square Garden, because when people think basketball, they think Madison Square Garden is the Mecca. So talk about that some. How was that night in and night out when you played home games at Madison Square Garden?
Well, it was great, especially because of the fact that we had such good teams and we drew such great crowds. I mean, we had sellout crowds at a lot of our games. We played against some of the best teams in the country. And New York prides itself, for knowing basketball and for appreciating good basketball. So they really appreciated our team, and rightfully so, because we were good. And we played like probably the best New York teams, the teams from the Willis Reed, DeBusschere days. I mean, that's the kind of team we had. I mean, we played tough, mentally tough, physically tough team basketball, where we'd have 5, 6 guys every night in double figures. And we could play, and the guys love to compete. Of course, when you have players like Artest and those guys playing for you, people appreciate it. And so we had a lot of good wins, cut down the net, won a Big East championship, won an NIT championship. I mean, cut down the net a couple of different times in the Garden, and doesn't get much better than that.
Right. So I'm going to go ahead and move into what I've really been trying to get, information so that it can help other coaches, not along with myself, but other coaches that may watch this. I know a lot of coaches say culture is just it's a word. And I just want to know, like, when you went to St. John's, because that was a championship culture, what was your way of building that culture there to get to that championship level?
Well, one of my mentors I mentioned was Red Auerbach, and I remember sitting with him in my office at George Washington, which was his alma mater back in the, I want to say in the 90s before I went to St. John's. And I never forget what he told me. He says, Coach, we used to talk about culture. We used to talk about managing people and, expectations, all that stuff. And so we very seldom talked about X's and O's. We kept that, sort of simple and out of the equation because everybody has their own system in that respect. But I'll never forget, he told me once, he said, a lot of people forget that in order to have a championship team, you got to have a championship culture. In order to have a championship culture, you have to recruit character, not characters. So even though some people think that some of my guys were characters, they really had tremendous character. And when you have guys that have great character and put winning first, like our guys did, then you can have championship success. So, guys have got to be willing to give of themselves, to sacrifice. They've got to have the 7 C's that I talk about in my book. They got to be confident. They got to be courageous. They got to be committed. They have to have character. They got to be able to communicate on and off the court. I mean, they have to be about team, the community, and they have to listen to the coach. And that's what my guys did. And that's the culture that I always try to instill in my teams. And, and some of my teams weren't as talented as others, but we always had a winning culture.
I want to talk about one player in particular. He ended up being one of my favorite players. He was with you, he was Ron Artest, but then, all the Meta World people. Talk about how it was to coach a guy that was just so mentally tough and then tough and physical as a player, just in general. How was that?
So, any particular player?
Ron Artest, in particular.
Ron was, to say the least, he was a challenge. And he was a challenge because Ron expected everybody to work as hard as he did. And he wouldn't take anything less than that. So there were times, in his days before he knew he was bipolar, that he didn't handle that well. So there were times when Ron would be, the best guy, the greatest guy, the most kind, gentle guy in the world. But then something would trigger, a different person that would come out from inside. So we had you have to manage that. And what I used to do, in fact, I remember telling Larry Bird once when he asked me, how'd you deal with Ron when he had those moments? And I said, you're not going to believe me, but I would call timeout and I would call the team out to half court and I would ask God to come into the huddle and we would pray. We went to half court because we always had media in the gym and I didn't want them to hear or know what was going on. So we'd go out and we'd pray and we'd ask for, God to come on into the center of our team. And that's why we chose center court and, just get everybody back into as one. And almost every single time, I'd say maybe with the exception of one time, that worked. And, Ron listened to God because basically he was such a great person, very kind and very, he just was a great person. So it was different. And I had to use a lot of different strategies that I had learned over the years to deal with not only Ron, but my St. John's teams.
Gotcha. So I will talk about philosophy here in a few minutes, but I wanted to ask you one question before I get into that. I know that a lot of college coaches and coaches in general spend a lot of time with practice planning. How much time would you say you would allot just for like one particular practice. There's no games in the week, but it's just practice, and you're going to have a 2.5, 3 hour practice. How much time would you spend with your staff, by yourself, preparing for that one practice?
Well, one of the things that I was taught and that I adhered to during my life as a college, high school coach was that practice shouldn't be pretty, didn't have to be pretty. It didn't have to have, different drills every day. In fact, my practices were pretty similar day in and day out. We had a system, and there were things that we did every single day, whether it was the fitness piece, the individual skills piece, the team building pieces, the 4-on-4, the 1-on-1 full court drills, and then the team thing. But my practices didn't vary very much from the time I developed my system and started coaching in high school. And, so I didn't spend a tremendous amount of time in practice because I had a template. And within that template, though, there would be, like, for example, let's say we were on the section of practice that dealt with, individual defense. Well, I'd have 3 or 4 or 5 things that I could choose from. So I would make sure that, I tried to pick the right thing in that group every day. But, and then when I'd go over those things with my coaches, and there might be something that we picked up on the day before that we needed to maybe really exaggerate the next day. So we would do that. And when we prepared, for example, when we played defense, we would not only, really try to work on our principles, but we would try within our defensive work, our build-up work, to also prepare for our next opponent while we were doing that. And it wasn't so like we were preparing for Duke, but we might have been preparing for some of the things that Duke did. And I tried to keep, our focus. Another thing I learned from Red Auerbach was spend most of your time concentrating on your own team. So I spent more time worrying about us than I did about them. And that that just paid really big dividends.
So going into philosophy a little bit, let's talk about your offensive and then lead into your defensive philosophy as well. Let's talk about what kind of system you developed offensively, and then what were your principles on defense and how that worked out.
Well, once again, my offensive philosophy and principles were built on what I saw, what I liked. And what I saw when I watched the Boston Celtics play was I saw simplicity at its best. I saw teams that didn't try to run complicated plays, but they executed. And more importantly, they always had options that they could go to counteract whatever the other team was doing. So my offensive philosophy was to try to build the offense so it fit the team's talent and personality and keep it simple. My defensive philosophy was and the thing that changed least over all my years of coaching was defense, because my defense was always built on those sound defensive fundamentals and principles that I learned at the very first clinic that I went to, which was a Bobby Knight man-to-man clinic. And so I took those principles, which were very similar to the principles that my college coach taught me. I adjusted those a little bit to fit some things that I thought would work as well. And that's basically, my defense, other than maybe throwing in some zones and some jump defenses, my defense was always built on solid, sound, man-to-man principles that the greatest coaches in the world used, like Bobby Knight. The guy that taught Bobby Knight how to coach and play defense was a guy by the name of Al Lababo, who most people never heard about. In fact, he ended up being an assistant at St. John's, but he was the head coach at Philly Dickinson. And he was one of the greatest man-to-man defensive coaches that ever lived. But many people never heard about him. So I even got some of his books.
With that, I know you said earlier that when you were in practice, you may be working on something that Duke does. How did you go about deciding for that particular day in practice because your drills didn't vary? How did you just decide that what you were going to focus on in practice outside of yourself was a team that may be coming up and some of the things that they do, or were you just really focused on what you guys did?
Well, it was a combination of both. So like I said, like if you, like, for example, within a certain part of my practice, let's say it's, you know, it's the 2-on-2 part of practice, like where we're going on 2-on-2. And I noticed that what Duke likes to do is they like to run a high ball screen, or they like to cross screen or flash high, whatever it was, that we take that particular piece and we really exaggerate that when we did that particular part of our practice. So that even though we were preparing for Duke, we were really working on us, on our defensive principles. And what happens during the course of the game, no matter how much you think you know or you don't know, it comes back to your principles. It comes back to your foundation. Because at the end, when the game is on the line, I mean, you know, when you got to act and react, it's really about what you've done every day in practice.
I talked about individual workouts with Coach Felton, who was my college coach at Western Kentucky. How important were individual workouts in the program, and how did you group your individual workouts? Because I've always been curious of how different coaches group their individual workouts. It's a little different because they can go right into practicing, but when I was playing, it was a 4-man workout, and you go 45 minutes and work on fundamentals.
Well, we had a fundamental, you know, like a skills component at the beginning of every practice. So everybody would go through, you know, like we'd have a, you know, whether it was at St. John's or GW, it'd be maybe the Colonial 13, where there's 13, you know, skill drills that everybody would rotate. I always believed that in terms of skills, everybody, no matter what position they played, there were certain skills that they should learn and master, regardless of whether they were asked to, you know, use those in a game or not. So we'd always have that part. And then when as far as individual, we break up and, like, for example, you know, the small guys, maybe a point guard group, you know, the off guard group, the forwards, the centers. Sometimes it was just guards. You know, once again, it's my Massachusetts accent. Guards down one end, big men down the other. And then, you know, the assistant coaches that were basically in charge of those groups would build on their the list of things that we wanted those players to get even a little bit more of than the whole group.
With that, you said you recruited characters. So I'm going to ask you, what 2 characteristics as a coach would you say were your most valuable characteristics that people would know you for, or your players would say, Coach Jarvis was whatever the characteristic is? What would you be known for those your two most characteristics?
Well, first of all, I mean, like every coach, you want to get the most talented player you can at the different positions. Excuse me, one sec. My battery is running low, so give me one sec. I want to plug in.
Yes, sir.
I want to make sure that I might have to take it off of here. And hold on one sec. Don't want to run out of juice while we're rolling here. Okay, so I'm gonna just hold my phone. You know, I'm looking for talent. Make no mistake about it. I mean, it starts with, you know, you got to be talented enough to play at whatever level I'm coaching at. I mean, if I'm coaching at, you know, BU, if I'm coaching at GW, if I'm coaching at St. John's, if I'm coaching at FAU, everyone is a little bit different level. So I've got to find the best players I can to fit at that level. And then what I want to do is I want to find guys that want to play for me. Because at the end of the game, and like I said, one of my 7 C's is coach, they've got to believe in me. They've got to have trust and faith in me, just like we have to have trust and faith in our Lord and Savior if we're going to follow his game plan. Right. So I want players that trust me, that have faith in me, that are recruiting me as much as I'm recruiting them, okay? I want players that want to be coached. I want players that can accept criticism because
I'm going to be as critical as I have to be, because the name of the game is to try to get every player to be the best that they can be. So I got to get players that can, I guess, handle it. Okay. And there's times, I mean, I know that I was a tough coach, and sometime I was probably too tough. But, I can't change that now. I can only say to coaches that, you can be tough, but you can also make sure that they know you love them. And I think there's a few guys, I don't think they quite understood that or didn't want to understand that. And, you try to reach everybody, but you can't. So I want guys that want to be coached, that want to be coached by me. I want guys that are mentally tough. And if they're mentally tough, then they'll usually be physically tough.
Right.
Because we won a lot of games because we out toughed the other team mentally and physically. So I want guys who are tough. And then, I want guys that want to win. I mean, we live in a society now where everybody gets a trophy. Kids, coaches are kissing kids' asses. I'm not going to be an ass kisser. I'm going to be an honest um, teacher. I'm going to try and give everybody, myself included, what I need or what they need, not what they want necessarily. And the bottom line is I want to win championships. So wherever I've been, the goal was to win a championship, whether it was in high school or college, whether it was the league championship or a tournament. You want to win. There's nothing better than coming into the locker room after a big win or after winning a championship. And I'd love for every player that I ever coached to feel that. Most of them did. We won championships at every school I was ever at. Some places we didn't win as many as I would have liked, but we won championships, and we won, more games usually than maybe they had won before. And so I want kids to learn how to win, and because that's what they're going to carry over into the rest of their lives when they graduate or when they leave. You want people to be successful, and that success you start to build as a player on the court, in the locker room, on the road, wherever it might be. When you go into Cameron, or you're going to Madison Square Garden, or you're going to the Smith Center at GW, or into the Case Center at BU, or the high school gym, or the Borough at Florida. It doesn't make any difference. When you go into that gym, baby, you gotta cross that line and give it everything you got.
So I'm gonna ask a little question about recruiting. When you were recruiting, or for what recruiting advice that you may give some coaches today, what were you particularly looking for? And then today, I know that social media is big when it comes to recruiting. Just give advice about the recruiting aspect of today, and then particularly what you were looking for. I know you had tough guys because I watched all your teams play. Just talk about the recruiting aspect a little bit from your point of view, and then what advice you would give today to some coaches that may be recruiting now.
Well, first of all, like I said, you got to recruit character. So you want to try to get to know the player as much as you can. The problem today is you don't really have as much time to get to know the player you're recruiting. Guys are recruiting players, in the eighth grade, seventh grade, sixth grade, fifth grade, before they even developed. They're recruiting guys. Starting to tell players how wonderful they are and how they can, go to the NBA. A lot of the recruiting, unfortunately, is not very honest recruiting. So, and part of it is that seldom do you get to know the kids as well as you need to. And as much as you need to know the kids, you really want to get to know the parents. You really want to get to know how those kids act at home and in school. So you got to talk to parents, and hopefully they'll be honest with you. You got to talk to teachers. You got to talk to guidance counselors. You got to talk to as many, and I tell you what, you better talk to the trainers of these teams, because they probably know what's going on with the players more than the coaches do. So, you want to talk to as many people as you can to try to find out what the person you're recruiting is really all about. And then you got to make a decision. Is he good enough? Is he tough enough? Does he want me as much as I want him, or at least half as much? Does he have the character and the guts, to get through the tough times? Or is he going to quit on me and transfer the minute I yell at him and things get tough?
You said you played a lot of man to man. So I'm gonna ask a question. You may not have a favorite defense outside of man to man, but what was your zone that if you went zone, what was particularly your zone that you played?
Well, you know what I did and I developed over the years? I developed what we call our combination defense. And what it was within our man-to-man defense, we could adjust and we could change little things, and we could take our five-man man-to-man defense, and we could play. We could turn it into a triangle and two, a box and one. We could turn it into a almost what would be the equivalent of a 2-3 zone by really sagging everybody off into the lane. So we made adjustments, and we could also adjust the way we played. Pick and roll situations or down screens or whatever. So I basically would rather. My first preference was to try and adjust my defense and make my man-to-man defense other things. And it's not as difficult as it sounds. And once you start doing it and see how it can be done and see how much fun you can have with it, you do that. And then to make that even more effective, you play a little bit of different zones. You might, against some teams, it might be a 2-3 zone. Against some teams, it might be a 1-3-1. Against, it might be a 1-2-2. We used to like to do a lot of quarter court pressing, and sometimes it would be soft. We just trying to slow the pace down. Sometimes it would be very aggressive, where you're really trying to get steals. Up tempo. So I think, to really be good on defense, you got to be able to change and adjust your defense. Just like if I was a pitcher, and baseball was my first love, my first sport. And I loved to pitch. I wasn't very good at it. I actually ended up being a catcher. But one of the things that I loved about pitching when I did was, even if you didn't have a great fastball, you could throw it at different speeds. So you could take one pitch and turn it into three. And that's what I tried to do with my defense. Take that one defense, and I could basically end up having 5-6 defenses out of that.
Well, with that, I want to pick your brain a little bit about the. You said something interesting there. It's like it would be very useful to some people, and myself included. You said you would take your man-to-man and sometimes make it look like a 2-3. With that, would the guys still rotate with the guy they were guarding, or would it just look like a 2-3 and then they just guard the guy in their area? How'd you work that?
Well, if it was one of our combination defenses off of our man, they would stay with their man. Okay. But what it would really be like, for example, let's just say we took our man-to-man defense and we said, okay, we're gonna instead of denying the next pass, we're gonna basically no matter what defense we play, we're gonna put good pressure on the ball. But everybody else, when we go into the sagging man-to-man defense, everybody else is going to play off of their man. When I was in high school, you'd have a foot in the lane. In college, you'd have a foot inside the three-point circle. So it would be like a sagging man-to-man defense. And yes, if your man, cut through to the other side, you'd go with them, but then you'd drop right back off into the lane. So basically what you would do is you'd clog up the lane, and when I first saw that it was played was by Al Lababo's teams at Fairleigh Dickinson. He used to call it keyhole defense, where the man on the ball played the ball. Everybody else had a foot in the keyhole, in the lane. And, so against a team that, for example, wanted to open the floor up, a team that, wanted to drive, it was a very effective defense. And of course, back in those days, kids didn't shoot it quite the way they do now. So as time went on, I had to adjust that a little bit. Instead of it being a foot in the 3-second lane, it was a foot. If you weren't playing the ball, you had to have at least a foot when you were on the ball side, inside of the 3-point circle. If you were on the weak side, then you could have a foot in the lane. So it adjusted according to the people we were playing and the teams we were playing.
And so it still looked like a 2-3, but
yeah. Yes, if you, for example, went from let's say the keyhole defense, the sagging man-to-man, to a 2-3. So if I was going to use that against a team, then I would probably complement that with a 2-3. So maybe one time down the court, or I might say to my team or signal, we're we're in our 23 defense. We're in a 2-3 zone until they score 2 baskets. So we played 23 zone until they scored 2 baskets. Then we would come out of that and play our sagging man-to-man. So what would happen is sometimes they didn't know if we were man-to-man or zone. And a lot of teams, they run different offenses, against different defenses. And what I learned from playing against John Chaney at Temple, where he played all kinds of different zones against you, if you tried to adjust and run a different offense every time down court, you were never going to beat him. So we started to finally figure out at least how to stay close and maybe beat Temple by running, just basically running the same offense no matter what defense they were in. And just little things like that. Take, for example, triangle and 2. So let's say I'm playing against a team and I'm going against 2 guys that can really shoot it. Well, I might have the 2 guys that are playing against those 2 shooters just stay close enough to touch them, be in a contesting denial position at all times. And the other 3 guys, maybe I put off into my sagging man-to-man, my keyhole defense. So we could have 2 guys extended all the way with 2 guys, with their best 2 players, and the other 3 players could be off in the lane. So if one of those 2 players had the ball, then it was perfect. If one of those 2 players didn't have the ball, then what we do is we pressure the ball like we would in every defense. We would deny those 2 players, and then the 2 remaining players would be in the lane. So you can take your man-to-man defense and turn it into a triangle and 2. You can do the same thing with the box and 1. And I would prefer to do that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I like changing defenses a lot. As a coach, I go from some 2-2-1 is one of my favorite presses. I like to take that from full court to 3/4 court. Actually, I'm sorry, 3/4 court to half court, and then up under the 3-point line, and then do the same thing with the diamond and 1.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I've never thought about it that way, and so now you've given me something that I can use as, making my man-to-man look like zone, but it's still man-to-man, and I'm not getting away from what I do man-to-man wise.
Well, if you would like, which I'm sure you will, I could send you. I could go into my coaching files and folders, and I'd be glad to send you. I've got, I did some. When I used to speak my early years at Nike clinics. A lot of times I'd speak on defense, and I'd speak on the changing defenses. So I'd be glad to send that to you. I believe I have your email information. I could email that off to you, and take what you like, discard what you don't like. No problem.
No, I like it because one year I was coaching JV boys basketball, and we were working on a triangle, the traditional triangle and 2 in practice. And
Yeah.
And I kept telling my guys, I said, we're going to go to this when we're up 4 points, and it's going to make a difference. I said, because the other coach is probably going to keep running man-to-man plays because we
Right.
got up. And sure enough, they did, and they kept running man-to-man plays, and the guy called timeout, and then I got out of it because I knew he was going to do something else. So I got out of it for like 2 or 3 possessions, went back to a 1-3-1. He called another timeout, and then I went back to a triangle and 2, and we ended up taking that 4-point lead and making it like a 12, 15-point lead. We ended up winning the game because of that switch. So being able to sky man is going to be really good. Especially, I think that would be good at the high school level because.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean that's where we sort of like really, really put it into practice, and I wasn't sure how it would work at the collegiate level, but it did. And so, of course, in my early years of being a head coach in high school, when I started coaching in high school, don't forget I had Patrick Ewing. So it didn't make any difference what defense we played, it was going to work.
Especially with him in the back. And
You bet.
Speaking of Patrick Ewing again, let's talk about that in just for a little bit. He was the #1 player in the country. He was playing for you. How was that? What was the practices like? What were the games like? I know coaches were coming in left and right. Ultimately, he chose Georgetown, but how was that?
It was incredible. But see, when I was feeling sorry for myself about not getting a high school job, God sent me back to Northeastern, then to Harvard, and then he put Patrick in my life. And what he was doing, because before I coached Patrick formally, I was teaching him informally, he and his phys ed teacher. And what I didn't realize at the time was God was preparing me to coach him. God knew that he would be the number one player in the country and that he would need a special plan. So my college experience gave me the opportunity to develop the Ewing plan. And, every college in America wanted Patrick. So I had to have a system. It had to be orderly. It had to be controllable. I promised Patrick's mother that I would try to give him as normal a senior year as possible. So, everything had to come through me, and she was totally fine with that. Coaches had rules to follow, and they did, as to what time they could call, who they could call, and so forth and so on. In those days, they could come and watch us every day if they wanted to. In fact, I remember one summer during the summer league, Lefty Drizel came to every game that we played. So coaches could come every night if they wanted to, but you couldn't have coaches calling every night, and you couldn't have coaches, messing with your kid's head. So, it was a very orderly system, and it worked, and it was set up, and and every coach knew exactly what the plan was going to be and what they had to do to follow it. And if they did, then they continue to at least be involved until Patrick was, narrow his schools down from the hundreds to the ones who would visit, which ended up being 16, to the ones he would visit, which ended up being 6, to the one that he would choose, which is 1. So it was and there was dates and a timetable set for the whole process.
What was his final 6 schools that he chose?
Final 6, there were 2 Boston schools, Boston U, where Rick Pitino was coaching, Boston College, where Dr. Tom Davis was coaching. There was Villanova, where Rolly Massimino was coaching. There was UCLA, where Larry Brown was coaching. And there was Georgetown, where John Thompson was coaching. Did I leave? Let me see. UCLA, that's 5. Villanova, Georgetown, BU, BC. Maybe it was 5. I thought it was 6. And if I can think of the 6th, how could I? Oh boy, let me see. Because I remember his first school he visited was UCLA. He had a great visit, but it was just too far. North Carolina, he loved Dean Smith and everything that went on there, but he just didn't feel like that was the place he wanted to go to school. I think early on he realized he needed to have a change of scenery, so he wasn't going to go to one of the Boston schools. Villanova, I said Villanova, right?
Yes, sir.
Was, let me see. So we got 2 Boston schools. We got Villanova. We got North Carolina. We got UCLA, and we got Georgetown. That's the 6, right?
Right.
Okay.
Did Mutombo come in? Did him and Patrick play together at Georgetown? I think they did, but I want to make sure I'm right.
I doubt it. I think John was too bad out of shape by the time when he was recruiting Pat. I mean, John would have had trouble staying with Pat when he was playing at a younger age, to be honest with you. Of course, he probably would disagree with me, but I remember seeing him play when he was at Providence, and I doubt. I mean, he might have, knowing John, he might have gone on the court for 10 seconds with Patrick, but I doubt very much. I never heard of them playing against one another.
What about Mutombo? Did Mutombo and Patrick play together at Georgetown, or did Mutombo come?
No. Mutombo was later on. I mean, you went from Ewing to Morning. They never played together. And then Mutombo, no, they never played together. I think Alonzo Mourning and Mutombo may have, but I know Patrick didn't play with either one of them. Now, he probably played against them. I'm sure, he did later on, but he never played with them, no.
Well, one of the last questions I got, and then we can kind of just talk as it comes. For aspiring young coaches that are trying to get into the business, and somebody like myself who's in it, what is some advice that you would give to young coaches?
Well, first of all, you go to college to get a degree. You coach to basically stay in the game and be involved with young people. But if you want to be successful in life, in business, and in sport, it comes down to like I mean, first of all, it's going to end up being God's will more than anything. God is going to put the right people in your life at the right time, if that's his plan for you. And networking, I think, is so critical. I mean, I could have done, I mean, I probably could have done a better job. I was just too busy doing what I was doing. But I would say that any young coach out there, try to network as much as you can. Try to get to know as many coaches as you can. Get involved with. I used to go to clinics. Go to clinics, get to meet coaches, introduce yourself, make up a business card, make sure everybody knows who you are, and also let people know you want to. You have aspirations as a coach. Because one thing my mom taught me, or one of the many things, was that Santa Claus ain't never bringing you anything if you don't ask for it. So you better ask for what you want. First, starting with God, you better ask God tell God what you want, and hopefully what you want is what He wants for you. And if that's the case, you'll go further than you could ever imagine. So start with Him. Anybody that you've ever coached with, stay connected with them, because many times those are the first jobs you get, because they know you best. They know they can trust you. They know you're going to be loyal. They know you're going to work hard. Then when you get an opportunity, make the most of it. Be the best that you can be at it. Not only must you look the part, and I say look the part, I mean, dress like a winning coach. I mean, get your friggin' pants up where they belong, get your belt on. Make sure your clothes are neat, pressed. If you go to meet with somebody, put on a shirt and tie if you got one. You can always take it off, comb your hair, brush your hair, shave your head, do whatever you have to do, but look the best you can. Look the part, because you're never going to get the part if you don't look the part. So sometimes you got to look the part before you get the part.
Right.
English, not gibberish. Forget about the jive time talk. Talk like you would if you were going out to represent that school recruiting. Coaches should feel confident that you're going to represent them well, because you're a reflection of the coach. So all the things that mom taught you, about the different life skills, those are the things that make the difference. And you never know who you're going to meet, when you're going to meet them. And so many of the cliches that we hear, like you only get one chance to make a first impression, um, the words that come out of your mouth not only tell people who you are, what your character is all about, but they also give people a good idea who you might be hanging with. Associate with good people. Birds of a feather do flock together. You know, um, continue to stay in communication with God, with your former coaches, and because those guys can help you.
Well, Coach, I really, really, really appreciate you taking some time out of your Saturday morning down there in that beautiful Florida state where the sun is shining. Guys, this video you can like and share it here on Facebook. It will be on my YouTube channel, Full Court Press with Coach J. It'll be up shortly. You can go find it there as well. I really appreciate this again. So thank you, Coach. I'm gonna take us off live, and then we'll finish up.
Okay. Well, let me also say this, that I've written 3 books, co-written. One is called Skills for Life, which was published along like early 2000s, which is a really good guide for a player or coach to some really basic life skills. Second book I wrote was Everybody Needs a Head Coach, which has 23 chapters, 23 stories that about Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Coach Krzyzewski, but all the stories are related to biblical stories, and there are, so it's a sort of like a faith-based, almost like biography, so to speak, in a way. And then the last book I wrote is The 7 C's of Leadership. Now, what I'd like to offer to you is this, Coach, is if you, starting with you, and I'm going to maybe put this on you, you're a man of faith, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So I've just written. I've taken my second book, Everybody Needs a Head Coach. I've done a 23-day devotional. People have a lot of time in their hands, especially now. I've got a 23-day devotional. If you put the word out there and you say, look, if any of you would like to receive Coach Jarvis's 23-day devotional, which will help you not only become a better coach, but a better person and maybe better connected with God. Let me know. You send me your name and you text me your name and number. You send me anybody's name and number that you want to receive the devotional. It's free of charge, 23 days. There are a couple of minutes each to read. I think it's very good. And then during that time, I'll tell them a little bit more about my last book, which is the 7 C's of Leadership. But here's what I'd like to do. If you could do me a favor, I want to show you my book.
Okay.
The last,
Yeah.
can you see that? Okay.
Yes, sir. I can.
Huh?
Yes, sir. I can see it.
Okay. This book here, this is an award-winning book. Trust me. Okay. Every coach, every player should have these 7 C's if they want to be successful. If they go to my website, if they go to coachmikejarvis.com or coachmikejarvis/7C, like the number 7 with a C, they can order this book online. And not only will they get the book, but they'll also get a complimentary ebook so they can put it in their phone. This book, I'm telling you, could make a difference and answer a lot of the questions that you and I would take hours and hours and hours to talk about. Okay? So I'll send you, one of my former players is doing he does like a book review, and Peter Young from George Washington, he's going to be reviewing my book in a couple weeks. When that happens, I'll send you that link, and then maybe you could share that with your people. Because this is, once again, I'm networking now with you because you can get the word out there to some people, and then they can get it out to other people. That's how we build the nation. That's how God came. Okay?
Okay. Yes, sir. I'll definitely do that for you. So, guys, be on the lookout for the link for Coach Jarvis's book. If you're interested in his book, 7 C's of Leadership, or the 23-day devotional, or any of his books, go to his website, coachmikejarvis.com, or you can reach out to me, inbox me, and I'll forward your information to him, and he'll get back in touch with you with all of that you will need and the directions that you'll need to get all that stuff. Coach, thank you again. I'll make sure that I spread that word too.
Don't worry. Listen, this has been a pleasure. I'm so glad that we have connected. You are now part of my family, and you continue to do God's work and the work you're doing, and help these young men and help our game. And hopefully the folks you're dealing with are serious enough to take the time to listen and to just meditate on what's being said, and realize that God's got a plan for them, and it's a plan for good. He wants them to prosper, as he says in the good book.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm gonna take us off live.